All right, welcome to my first VED, which is a video editorial. And the reason I'm calling it a VED instead of a vlog is I'm not just documenting my daily stuff. I've got a topic in mind that I want to discuss my point of view on. And that's technology and how fast it's accelerating, how fast it's been just in my lifetime. I look back at my parents, for example, my mother, she died at 64, I believe it was, and she was born in 1924. So as far as technology went, I think about in terms of the telephone. Her original phone in her house would have been what they called a party line, where several families shared the same phone line. And if you wanted to use the phone, you had to go in and you pick it up and you go, oh, there's somebody on it, I'll have to wait till later. If you calling in, it rang to your phone, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, in her lifetime, that was the extent of the acceleration of technology as far as the phone was. She had a party line, and then maybe at best, at some point later in her life, it went to a private line. But she never saw cell phone technology. And I'm sitting here today with my iPhone recording this, with recording the video, the audio, and then I'll be able to take that digital information and download it to the internet for potentially millions of people to view. And that's just bizarre, man. That's crazy. And she loved the phone so much. I really hate that she missed this, because her evenings were dedicated to, after cooking supper for the family, she would watch some news on television and maybe a little bit of Jeopardy. And then she would retire to the bedroom and she would call all her girlfriends and chit-chat. And that was her evening entertainment. And then after that, she would read for a couple hours before she went to bed. And those things, reading is, nobody reads anymore except for what they might see on the internet. I want to talk about technology and where all this is heading, because there's a point at which technology is just going to absolutely explode in acceleration. And that's going to be when we reach technological maturity. And that's when machines become smarter than human beings. And then at that point, machines that are smarter than human beings will start creating their own machines. And eventually it'll lead to simulations, that universal simulations, where we won't know if we're real or not. And that's something that a philosopher named Nick Bostrum has come up with, where he came up in the late 90s with a simulation argument that he concluded that it's not only possible, but it's probable that we are, in fact, now living in a computer simulation. And his premise for that was one that we'll never be able to do that's just not going to happen, because we will become extinct before we're able to reach that point of technological advancement. Kim Jong-un and Trump will get together and get pissed off and blow up the world eventually, or that's the theory. That'll happen before we reach this point of technology. The second premise was that maybe even if we develop to the point that we won't, for whatever reason, whether it be ethical reasons or resource reasons, not having the resources, or it would take pooling of too many resources in order to do it, or financially too many people would have to get together and invest, or whatever reason, that if we could, we don't. And then the third premise is that it's already been done, and we are a simulation. So if we are a simulation, if our ancestors have had the ability to create a universal simulation, then chances are they've created more than one. And then when you start doing this mathematically, that's where the probability comes in that we're actually living in a computer simulation. There's another guy he's a physicist. His name is Tom Campbell, and he's worked for NASA, and he's done some other experimentations in a lab. I don't remember which lab it was. Maybe it was at Duke, somewhere in Duke. I know he lives here in North Carolina. But he wrote a book called My Big Toe, which is my theory of everything. And he goes along the same lines as Bostrum, that we are in fact a simulation, or at least we appear to be a simulation, that everything we see, everything we do, all of this is just data. It's ones and zeros, just like a computer system is. and that our consciousness, our individual consciousness, is linked to a much greater consciousness, and that all of that and combined together is the computer that runs the simulation. So with his theory, it's like the avatars are running along, and if one of the avatars dies, your avatar dies, what happens to you? Well, since you're the computer, since you're the consciousness that's running the game, nothing. You continue on. So interesting stuff from this guy, man. He says that our goal here on Earth is to grow, is to evolve, to reduce our entropy, which is a physics term that means reduce our chaos or our disorder, become more organized, and to develop and evolve to a point of pure love. That's the goal, anyway. That's what he says overall consciousness is goal is. It's hard to say. Anyway, I'll leave some links down in the description about Thomas and his book. I mean, you start reading this thing, it's mind-boggling. You read a couple paragraphs and you go, whoa, wait a minute, I got to think about that a bit. So it's not lighthearted reading. It's pretty heavy duty. Also, the guy that thinks along those same lines is a man named Dan Hoffman, and he's a cognitive scientist. And so he says that consciousness creates the reality that we see, but it's not everything. And his analogy for this is that when we see a chair or whatever, it's the same thing as looking at a computer desktop and seeing an icon of a folder. And we know that if we click on that folder, it brings up a word processor that displays a letter that we've written that we can edit and change and add to it or delete. But we don't see the real reality of it. We don't see that there's integrated circuits, that there's microprocessors, that there's machine languages of ones and zeros that create the software, and all the complexities involved with just clicking on that little icon. So he says that our consciousness creates this reality to make it simpler for us, because our minds at this point in evolution have just not evolved to the point that we're capable of understanding the big picture, which is another really cool theory. He also wrote a paper about where all this is headed, the evolution of this, where once we reach a point of this technological maturity where machines become smarter than humans, that we'll be able to download, potentially be able to download, map and download our brains, our minds, our spirit, our consciousness to a disk. And that in the future, and they're talking about as maybe as soon as 2045, something like that, that we'll be able to do this, and you could potentially think about this is mind-boggling. You could potentially save your brain, your mind, your spirit to a disk, and then 50 years down the road, that could be downloaded to a robot that you would then be able to control. So your body's, if you're a young person, you need to think about this. You need to start eating healthy and not smoking and not doing recreational drugs and participate in medical advances that we have in any way, shape, or form that you can extend your longevity, your lifespan, so that you might be able to participate in this, because this could be, like I said, man, technology is getting ready to explode. I mean, just blow the hell up. So I just think all of this is really, really interesting. And that's my VED for the day, my video editorial. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you'll look at some of these links down below and do some research on your own, because I'm by no means a philosopher. This is just things that I run across in my daily activities and conversations with friends and such. And it just, the more I think about it, the more it blows my mind. All right, so I hope you'll take a minute. I hope you'll subscribe to this channel. I'm going to do some more of these VEDs. I think that's a term that I've coined. And maybe you'll learn something. Who knows? Thanks.